Hi, this is Dr. Duncan Ferguson of the University of Illinois and Vet Med Academy. I'd like to thank my collaborators from the Veterinary Educators and Pharmacology Special Interest Group, Drs. Normandy, Bendrick, Verlar, and Chambers, for without their help, this project would not have been possible. In this joint project between Veterinary Educators of Pharmacology Special Interest Group and Vet Med Academy, we're going to talk about the drug regulations associated with food animal practice. And I'm going to do this through interviews of faculty members of VEPSIG that were from the UK, Holland, representing the EU, and Colombia, representing South America to some extent, and New Zealand. And in this process, we're going to use a case scenario to highlight the major points. I will summarize things at the end, so hopefully you'll be able to see those points in written form at the end. And I hope you enjoy it. I certainly did. I really appreciate all of the faculty that contributed to this. And also, I learned quite a lot along the way, so I hope you do as well. Okay, let's move on to that second scenario that I was thinking about, and that getting us to food animals, and specifically just to create a conversation. And I noticed you have a background in antimicrobial resistance, so maybe you can comment any way you want to on this. Treating mastitis in, say, a 2-3-year-old heifer, what would be the first line? You know, what drugs would be the first line drugs and in food animals? And is there any? How would this be determined?
So again, it's quite similar. The cascade follows the same rules for farm animals, with just a couple of stipulations as well. So the first line treatment generally for mastitis, having consulted with my farm animal colleagues, is generally beta-lactams and aminoglycosides. For dry cows, there's a similar choice, but there's slightly fewer drugs available. Some of the drugs have been, say, authorized for a particular type of mastitis. So cloxacillin is used for penicillin-resistant staphylococcus. So you should be choosing an appropriate antimicrobial based on the suspected issue there. I think that it's really important that we do sort of follow those first line drugs. Obviously, in this sort of scenario where we have resistance, there's additional things to consider. And if your treatment isn't being successful and you do end up selecting something that isn't authorized necessarily for that condition in that species, it does still have to have had a maximum residue limit determined in a food animal. So in Great Britain, there's a specific list that is named the Great Britain Maximum Residue Limit Register, which is useful. For Northern Ireland, they're still using the EU regulations. So there's a table published online by the EU, regulation 37/2010, and in one of their annexes, there's a whole list of drugs that have a maximum residue limit. Obviously, if you're using products under the cascade in this way, you need to state like statutory withdrawal periods that are defined. So 7 days for milk, 28 days for meat, because obviously they won't be defined in that particular species for that condition. And always make sure you're checking that. So we have different statutory limits for animals that have been treated under the cascade.
Is there, you mentioned, is there a list of drugs, we have this in the United States, that are absolutely banned for use at any level in food animals?
No, we have a list of what you can use, not a list of what you can't.
That's interesting.
Yeah. That's the way we tend to go.
So you're saying you have a list of approved drugs,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
it's
when
those drugs that have that maximum residue limit defined. Only those drugs can be used. Those are what are on those lists. And if they're not on that list, no.
So in the U.S., we have, a list of banned drugs, and it boils down to 1, 2, 3, 6 or 7 drug classes, a few of which are antimicrobials. The most prominent is chloramphenicol because of human, toxicities. And then when you get to extra label use in those species, veterinarians are encouraged to establish the appropriate withdrawal time using the Food Animal Residue Avoidance Data Bank, which is FARAD, which is a online service that helps them guide, their choice or length of withdrawal.
Yeah.
But in that situation, you'd have to, be highly well documented with the farmer, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and in some case, you still are at risk of responsibility if a residue is found in the milk tank. So
I think in terms of those standard withdrawal periods I was talking about, when we talk about it with our students, we do say think about due diligence. The standard withdrawal period for milk might be 7 days, but if you look and the withdrawal period defined for all of the species milk is 28 days, maybe you want to consider what would be more appropriate. These standard withdrawal periods are kind of the minimum that you would do. So for eggs, it's 7 days, milk 7 days, 28 days for meat.
You may have already, the last question I had about this scenario was, you may have already answered it. If you found a resistant staph, some drug that brought you outside of the drugs that are already on your list, what are the options? Are they pharmaceutical or are they management at that point in the UK?
So the majority of dairy farms in the UK are a member of what is called a red tractor assurance scheme, and they detail requirements for use of certain antimicrobials. So if it was things like critically important antimicrobials that were the only thing they were susceptible to, you could make an argument for using those, but only if necessary testing had been undertaken, as is detailed by the red tractor scheme itself. So the red tractor scheme is a voluntary thing, but the majority of farms do follow that as well, and that gives really clear guidance on you shouldn't be using these antimicrobials unless there is clear and defined evidence that it's the only thing that you can do. And obviously, I mean, we have critically important antimicrobials defined by the World Health Organization, and that's for humans, but with the OIE obviously defines critically important antimicrobials for animals as well. So I think it's important that, well, for all of us really, that we keep abreast of what's on there, what the guidance is on there, and schemes like the red tractor scheme for us do keep abreast. And it, farmers know what those farmers and vets know what those for third and fourth generation cephalosporins, fluoroquinolones, things like that shouldn't be used unless absolutely necessary.
So if an animal the choice was, we're going to have to cull this animal, but let's say the animal is a highly valuable genetic, a breeder, for example, would they be able to keep that, to save that animal, if you will, if it had a very serious systemic infection with one of these drugs, and then just not allow it back into the food chain? Is that option available to a vet?
So basically, it could be available, but there needs to be a vet report saying that
that's what you're doing.
These are the tests.
Right. That this is why we think we can save the animal with this drug because of the evidence.
So they will look back over what's been done before on the farm, and use that to inform what's done moving forward. But they definitely want the evidence that those antimicrobials would be the only option available, and that can't just come from the farm. It has to come from the vet report.
I think the newest guideline for mastitis is more based on the clinical signs than on the bacterial culture. We used to have a guideline based on culture, but well, in the first instance, of course, you don't have a culture yet.
Right.
So we speak of mild mastitis and severe mastitis, or grade 1, 2, and grade 3. And then the approach is different. With a mild mastitis, well, you think mainly of gram-positives, and the cow is not systemically ill. So the first choice treatment, well, we have intramammary treatment with cloxacillin or penicillin, procaine, benzyl penicillin, or cloxacillin. Those are first choice in the antimicrobial policy here in the Netherlands. Well, and then you, of course, you take your sample and you culture, and you in a few days you know the sensitivity and, well, which bacteria it is. So if it's necessary, then you can change your therapy, and perhaps it's needed to take another first choice antimicrobial, or to take a second choice antimicrobial, or even a third. That is possible if you have the argumentation, if you have the sensitivity test, which proves that. For systemic treatment for mild mastitis, we also have some options. In the first choice, we have penicillin, but then in an alkalic form, like benetamab. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Or we have tyrosine, some small spectrum macrolides, and, well, those are the most logical. We also have TMPS registered for mastitis, but, well, that's less logical because, well, of course, it doesn't work that well in the other. You don't have a systemic
trimethoprim sulfate,
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So that's not a logical choice. That is perhaps a logical one for severe mastitis, where you want to treat a systemic infection. So those are the first choices we have mainly. I can show you the document as well, if that's nice. So this is the grade 1 or 2 mastitis, mainly gram-positives, and this one I talked about, cloxacillin or penicillin. And then the second choice is, those are intramammary treatments. So the second choice is less logical. So mainly broad-spectrum beta-lactams. Well, that's not necessary when you have either a streptococcus or a staphylococcus, and some combinations with even aminoglycosides, but those are, of course, more logical when you have gram-negative infections. But this is mainly based on the sensitivity test, on the sensitivity of the bacteria. So you have to have an argumentation to do this. But those preparations are all on the Dutch market, so we all have registered preparations with these compounds. So you can use them if you have the argumentation. Those are all allowed in food producing and milk producing cattle.
Okay.
So these are the ones for systemic treatment I talked about just now. And then second or even third choice, again, based on sensitivity. And those ones are actually not logical because they don't reach the milk in sufficient concentration. So those are logical in severe mastitis and systemic disease, and not in only infection of the udder, right? So, well, that's in summary.
So you have a list of those. These are all approved if you make your documentation again. Do you have a list of in the EU of drugs that are banned or not approved?
Yes, we have. I have the Commission regulation here, European regulation, the 37/2010, and this is a list. There are two lists, the two annexes. One list with allowed substances within Europe, within the EU, I must say, and the second list is banned substances. So those are not allowed. And of course, when you're not on a list, you're also not allowed.
Right.
So these table 1 is compounds with an MRL, a maximum residue limit, and then you can see if it's allowed for milk producing animals as well. So this one, for instance, is not allowed for milk producing animals. There's no MRL for milk. Some compounds, of course, no MRL necessary. So you can allow use them. If you use them, that's usually through cascade use, and then you have usually a withdrawal period of 7 days for milk. But the registered compounds, of course, they have an MRL on this list, and the pharmaceutical company has done research into the withdrawal periods, and they of course have withdrawal periods for milk and for meat on the SPC. So yes, perhaps we can. This is a long list.
So
I can send it to you, and then at the end there's the Annex 2. Those are the forbidden compounds, and for antimicrobials, and that's the chloramphenicol,
okay.
and the metronidazole, and the nitrofurans. Yeah.
Right, that looks very familiar to us in the United States. We have a prohibited drug for extra label use, and mainly for human safety. Chloramphenicol would be the one drug here, as an antimicrobial that might be could be chosen, I suppose, for this particular indication, and obviously shouldn't be.
No, this is perhaps also nice to show. This is our document for the policy around antimicrobials. It's in Dutch, but I think it's quite, this states, for instance, that carbapenems, glycopeptides, these antimicrobials are not allowed at all in animals within the Netherlands or within the EU. So also not through cascade use. Those are reserved for humans.
Right.
Colistin, there's a lot to do about colistin as well. So you can still use it in pigs, but only under specific circumstances with specific argumentations. And here is an overview of what are first, second, and third choice antimicrobials. So with green, yellow, and orange, and the red ones are prohibited for food-producing animals. So those do not have an MRL or are prohibited, like we talked about. And this is in a table. So here you can see all compounds with first, second choice or prohibited. So that's perhaps also a nice overview.
So you have a very detailed guidance with withdrawal times for food. And is there any indication, like we have in the United States, where we have the food animal residue avoidance database that's managed? And I think I've heard that some European sources use it, or institutions may occasionally use it, but it looks to me like that's all been built into this document, that kind of information.
I think it is. Yeah, we have quite a clear system here about which compounds are allowed in food producing animals, in milk producing animals, and also about the antimicrobials, what is first, second, and third choice, and what should be the argumentation to use that. And for third choice antimicrobials, it is obligatory to show a sensitivity test, which shows that it's really necessary to use it by law. It is, yes. Arranged.
So what are the consequences for the farmer and for the veterinarian if, let's say, there's any use outside of these guidelines that's detected, and perhaps in the milk bulk tank?
Yeah, you get you get a fine, and I think that if it's repeatedly a problem, then you really have a problem as a practitioner. So there's a really strict rules and strict control around that. So that's not mild. No.
Okay, and what about horses? So horses can fit into the food animal or not in some EU countries. I don't know if that's the case in the Netherlands. Is that true?
Yeah, it is. We have for horses is about the same system with this regulation as well. So those are also the allowed and prohibited substances in food-producing horses. Only for horses, we have one additional guideline, and that's the EU guideline 122/2013. That's the 6-month list, we also call it. So this is a list with compounds which are, well, critically important for equine medicine. And those are allowed to use in food-producing horses with a withdrawal period of 6 months. And you have to write it down in the passport of the horse if you use such a compound. And what's also an option, of course, here in Europe and in the Netherlands, is that you exclude the horse for human consumption in the passport. And then then you can use a lot more compounds which are not allowed through these guidelines. Then it's a companion animal.
So I've got some personal experience, with veterinarians thinking about passports when I was in Germany. Can you just briefly tell us what a passport is for those students that might not know what the passport's all about in the EU?
Yes,
for food animals.
Here it is obligatory to put a transponder in the neck of a horse, so a chip, if you want to transport a horse or even go on the street with the horse, then it has to have a chip. It's also regulated by law. So it has to be chipped, transponder, and then linked to the number of the transponder is a passport. And in the passport, well, the identification of the horse is arranged. So the color and the marks, birthmarks, that sort of thing, and all necessary data, the vaccinations, of course, but also if there's any medication, if from the 6 months list, if it's used, then it has to be written down in the passport, or the horse can be excluded for human consumption in the passport. And then it's a companion animal by law. Then you don't have to worry about withdrawal periods. Well, when you lose the passport, or then you get a new one, but we have to pay for it, and then the horse is automatically excluded for human consumption, of course. Right. So if the veterinarian does his work, and if the owner is responsible and doesn't do anything strange, then it is a good system, I think, because at the slaughterhouse, the passport is checked, and it should work, the system, but yeah.
And so just to make it clear that the chip in the horse is an ear tag in, say, cattle, correct? Or there's also chipping? I don't think there's a chipping system in a food animal like cattle.
No, it's an
ear tag.
In a cow, there's an ear tag, or in sheep, yeah. But that's of course that's not so well. It's not possible to register
as a
really
pet,
well which medication goes in an individual cow or in an individual sheep. I think that's a difficult one.
Okay, that's true. Yeah.
Probably the choices are probably largest than other places because there are no restrictions as to which antimicrobial you want to get a hold of. So basically, the market is, it's quite open, and there is you can actually go to agrochemical stores, and they sell just about any family of antimicrobials, and obviously the main ones that you usually resort to are probably the beta lactams. But I was looking at other products that are sold for mastitis, and you can basically find all the other families, all the other drug families in there. So when it comes to the scenario, I have to first, call attention to the fact that in Colombia, we still have the contagious pathogens as the most prevalent ones. And I'm talking about Staphylococcus aureus and Streptococcus agalactiae. So until we really tackle those two organisms, the other ones are not big players, for the economy in general. So in this case, probably what veterinarians would do is isolate that animal and treat them, for up to a week maybe, and then if the mastitis resolves, it gets back, the cow gets back into circulation again. The problem with the Staphylococcus aureus is that it's probably one of the toughest ones to treat because, as you know, it attacks the parenchyma. It causes fibrosis, microabscesses. So, if you have a recurrent cow that you treat once and relapses, it's probably because it's as I say, Staphylococcus is just very difficult to treat.
So, to be fair, just to go back to your comment about being able to buy it at some of the agricultural supply, that's true in the United States, and it's actually been a very serious concern when it comes to antimicrobial resistance, that the farmer can get access to these. And then if you go to other countries, it may be that there are veterinarians who are loosely connected to a web of sale that occurs outside of the true patient, client veterinary relationship. So let me ask this question: is there a widely known list? I think you may have answered this. List of drugs that are approved for food animals, and conversely, is there a list of banned drugs for food animals in Colombia? And how does that, if there is, how does that get enforced?
Well, there are certain antimicrobials that you need to get through a human hospital, vancomycin, just a few selected ones. And I don't know off the top of my head which ones they are. Amphotericin, vancomycin, probably.
But the ones that, let's say, would be second line, third line, from the beta-lactams that you mentioned for resistant, or would they would use some management or cull the animal more likely in that scenario?
They would call the animal probably if it is a chronic infection that you cannot treat. Otherwise, they probably treat it, the first time, and I don't.
And it might depend on the genetic potential of that animal. Might be part of it. Yeah.
If it is just 1/4 or 2 of them or 3.
Yeah. Right.
So probably depends also on how much milk that cow is producing,
But is there a list of banned drugs or approved drugs, one or the other?
Yeah.
We have a banned list in the United States.
Well, I was looking at, as I say, a formulary to see which ones have an indication for mastitis, and I have a huge list.
But they're all approved. They're all approved for use in Colombia now.
Yes.
Because they're on that list. Okay.
Well, and a lot of them are in the 3rd and 4th generation cephalosporins and fluoroquinolones, which, as you know, should be reserved for,
which are reserved in other countries.
So basically, and you can find them, for most of them, are parental, but then I was checking. Cefoperazone is a 3rd generation cephalosporin and is for intramammary administration. Clavamox is another mammary one, and then in the parenteral group you have drugs in every family category.
So again, getting to the issue of, are there any practical limits for a veterinarian to be able to use an antimicrobial to treat a patient, do you see? Or are they pretty wide open again?
Well, the main thing they have to keep an eye on is not to go beyond the withdrawal time for milk, because they do check with how do you say it? The Delbo test is kind of a test for drug inhibition.
Right. Right. Any antimicrobial activity. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a milk tank regulation, and therefore they should be wise to pay attention to withdrawal times, regardless. What about meat? What about the meat? What about withdrawal?
I don't think with meat they don't really check for antimicrobials in meat. So
would the chain of responsibility, the farmer, go from the farmer to the veterinarian in the case of finding, say, a milk tank violation? Would there be any enforcement?
Yes, they do enforce that, but it's enforced through the dairy companies.
Okay.
Not the government agency. So most farmers will go ahead and treat the animal without a veterinarian, because in Colombia most dairies are kind of family run, and they're small. We don't have large herds of hundreds of animals. In Colombia, it's still the use of hand milking is quite widespread too. So they still don't use milking machines in many places. So,
well, again, there's the pattern of mastitis in New Zealand is different from most other places. So strep uterus would be way up the top of the list for us. We have relatively large herd sizes. So I think the average size is 440 something cows. There are very heavy penalties for high somatic cell counts. So animals with chronic Staph aureus infections tend to get culled. So either they're sent off to the works or just killed and disposed of on the farm. So it'd be rare for animals with any sort of complicated Staph aureus infection to be treated at all. Now, again, the legal requirements are basically the vet has got to make a decision. The Veterinary Council is very keen for vets not to use critically important antibiotics unless they've got a really good reason to do it. So that would involve doing culture and sensitivity and so on. But I say in practical terms, it just wouldn't happen. The average cow here is worth, even a good cow is worth maybe $2,000. And if you're talking about 400 cows with high cell counts, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars worth of penalties. So it doesn't happen.
And so that obviously what you're saying is that penalty or that recognition of that occurs at the bulk milk tank.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And how far back would the responsibility go?
The farmer's primarily responsible, but if the farmer can show that the vet gave advice which led to problems, then the vet would get in trouble as well. Okay.
So are there any lists in New Zealand with regards to drugs that are absolutely banned from food animal use?
There's a very small list, and it's basically chlorinated insecticides like DDT and so on, which were banned by international treaty back in the 90s, as far as I remember. So there's nothing which is completely banned that's in general use.
To summarize what I understood, the practical aspect of it is really impacted by the type of dairy farming in this case. The size of the farms. Actually, that surprises me. I had this vision. Very small farms in New Zealand, but it's not the case.
They're all big these days.
And so you've had a lot of conglomeration probably like the US. And that becomes a practical issue in terms of the animals having a chronic infection at all. And so being treated for that is really practically not an issue.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
No, the big political thing at the moment is dry cow therapy. The
Yes.
Veterinary Council and the New Zealand Veterinary Association are trying to phase that out. I'm not sure they'll ever manage to do it completely, but yeah, it largely comes down to economics again. If there's some cheaper way of doing it, farmers will go for that.
Right. And so, but the pressure to do that is antimicrobial resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The resistance in New Zealand is pretty low at the moment, but obviously everyone would like to keep it that way if possible.
In brief summary of the drug regulations for food animal medicine around these countries that we looked at throughout the world. In the UK and the European Union, very prescribed cascade lists of approved drugs are provided to veterinarians, including minimum milk and meat withdrawal times. In the EU and New Zealand, like the United States, there is a list of banned drugs for food animals. In the UK and the EU for antimicrobial drugs, the third tier choices require culture and sensitivity to be performed to document their necessity, and the critically important antimicrobials for human infections are widely discouraged. The European Union has the passport system, the medical passport for food animals that include ear tags for cattle and sheep and transponders for horses. Horses must specifically be defined as non-food animals before they can be regulated as companion animals, allowing a wider use of drugs in the latter situation. Food animal use of drugs is much less restricted in Colombia with small dairy operations, but enforcement occurs for milk residues and not generally meat residues. In New Zealand, cattle farms are very large with regulations discouraging maintaining animals with chronic infections or practices that would encourage antimicrobial resistance.